Some crimes don't fade with time. They just hide, buried deep in corners where even silence forgets them. But when they return, they leave behind only bodies, and questions that aren't asked for answers but for justice. A paper smile, an unfinished apology, and a revenge that simmered for 15 long years. This is the story of paper swans soaked in blood, whispering only one thing: did you really think you got away? There is an unspoken melancholy that cloaks the English coastline in the grip of autumn, a kind of mournful elegance that seeps into the stones, the sea and the soul. The skies turn the color of old tin clouds, dragging their bellies low as if whispering ancient secrets to the waves below. Tourists vanish with the last ice cream cone, and what remains is silence, vast, comforting and profound. I had returned from Argentina seeking precisely this quietude. A pause. I imagined long walks beside crashing surf, the salt stinging my cheeks, and perhaps evenings of brandy, chess, and the warmth of fading memories. London welcomed me with a cold drizzle, and the familiar comfort of my club's high ceilings and worn leather chairs. I hadn't even finished my first glass of sherry when the telephone shrieked, an abrupt mechanical cry that shattered the calm like a gunshot in a cathedral. As soon as I lifted the receiver and heard that unmistakable voice, flavored with Belgian precision and emotional urgency, I knew rest had abandoned me. Mon ami, you are back and yet you say nothing to me. This, Hastings, is unforgivable. Poirot's words tumbled with theatrical flourish, his indignation sincere yet touched with affection. I smiled despite myself, telling him I had only just arrived. But he, of course, had already discovered this, thanks to Colonel Marchbanks, a man whose fondness for food is matched only by his inability to keep a secret. You must listen, Poirot pressed, his voice sharpening. There is a situation, how do you English say, most peculiar. You must abandon all plans, immediately. I have been summoned to Lime Haven. There has been a murder. The word hit me like a splash of seawater. Murder, I repeated, my vision of peaceful idleness dissolving instantly. Poirot didn't pause. A widow, Madame Eleanor Blackwood, found strangled in her home. No forced entry, locked doors. But the most unusual thing, Hastings, beside her body, someone placed a swan, made of paper, folded with elegance, with intention. The imagery lodged in my mind, the contrast of lifeless flesh and delicate origami, death and art entwined. I was already reaching for my coat before I realized it. Hours later I sat across from him in a polished first-class carriage as steel tracks sang beneath us, carrying us further from comfort and deeper into enigma. Outside, the countryside blurred, hedgerows bleeding into misty fields, while inside, Poirot sat upright, eyes gleaming, mustache impeccable, scribbling notes in a little notebook with maddening calm. Tell me everything, I urged. He closed the notebook with deliberate grace. She was discovered by her maid early yesterday, strangled swiftly and efficiently. There were no signs of struggle. The doors were locked, and the windows secured, except for the French doors leading to the terrace. They were found ajar, yet the maid swears she latched them. I frowned. So a locked room mystery. Ah, may none. Not exactly. The unlocked doors introduced doubt. But the precision, Hastings, the timing, the detail, it speaks of planning. This was not a crime of passion. He tapped his fingers together. And the swan, it may be a signature, or perhaps a message, something only the killer and the victim would understand. As the train chugged southward, the landscape shifted from grey stone to chalk cliffs rising like frozen waves above a dark, roiling sea. Lime Haven appeared like a dream half remembered, picturesque yet oddly removed from time. The Grand Atlantic Hotel stood sentinel over the harbor, its windows watching like quiet eyes. The wind howled through its eaves with the voice of something old and restless. We had barely checked in when a tall, weather-beaten man approached us in the lobby. Inspector Finch, his skin reddened by years of coastal wind, his shoulders carrying the weight of a town unsettled. Monsieur Poirot, he said, shaking hands with cautious hope. We're grateful, truly. This case, it's rattled us. People are frightened, not just by the death, but by what it suggests. There's something off here, something theatrical. His eyes shifted to me. Not just a murder, sir, a performance. And we haven't figured out the script yet. He led us to a secluded sitting room where the full weight of the case began to settle around us like gathering fog, thick, clinging, and full of questions that refused to stay buried. No one in the town could recall a single soul who had ever spoken ill of Eleanor Blackwood. He had been the kind of woman people admired quietly, a fixture in every charitable event, her presence soft but unwavering, like the tide that lapped against the rocks of Lyme Haven. 12 years a widow, she had chosen solitude not out of bitterness, but out of quiet resolve, living modestly in her ivy-covered coastal her life a gentle rhythm broken only by the daily visits of her maid who left before nightfall, never staying after the shadows grew long. Yet now the stillness she had cultivated lay shattered, replaced by a silence soaked in horror. Poirot sat listening, his eyes not just observing but dissecting each word spoken by Inspector Camden, who detailed how her body was discovered, seated in her favorite armchair, a pale silk scarf wound brutally around her throat, the life long fled from her eyes, yet not a single item in the house could be matched to that particular piece of fabric. Foreign, Poirot noted softly. Not looking up, introduced, I asked about the paper swan. Camden nodded grimly, and from an evidence envelope he withdrew it, a fragile hand-folded origami no larger than a matchbox, white as bleached bone, creased with masterful precision. It was not just paper, it was a message. Poirot took it gently, his fingers moving as if handling an artifact too sacred to disturb. He turned it this way and that, then brought it to his nose. There is a scent faint, but purposeful, he whispered. Salt, yes, but more than the sea, something infused. Camden confirmed the same. Their medical examiner described the smell as reminiscent of the ocean, but condensed, intensified, like sea air caught in a bottle. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, but we are beside the sea. This has been taken from it. Distilled perhaps. Someone wants us to smell the ocean where it should not be. Arrangements were made to visit the scene at first light. That evening, in the dim-lit hotel dining room, Poirot scarcely touched his food. He criticized the soup as lacking clarity and texture, praised the fish, yet chewed mechanically. His mind was not at the table but already circling the crime scene like a hawk. Outside, the windows reflected the candlelight, hiding the coming storm. Later in our rooms I watched him align his toiletries on the dressing table, each object placed with deliberate perfection. His silver-handled comb adjusted and readjusted until it sat at a flawless right angle. There is a chill, Hastings, he murmured, not looking at me. Not from the sea but from what is behind this act. It is not only the paper swan, it is the intention, the timing. This is no crime of passion, it is architecture. He gestured to the dark window where the channel stretched unseen beyond the glass. There is a storm, mon ami. And I speak not only of weather. This is orchestration. The murder is merely a note in a symphony not yet heard. I tried to brush off his words with nervous laughter, but he turned, his face grave. When you have seen as much evil as I have, Hastings, you begin to smell it like rot beneath fresh paint. This paper swan, it is a herald, a symbol, a warning perhaps. Mark my words, Madame Blackwood was chosen, and she will not be the last. That night I could not sleep. The wind tore at the windows like desperate fingers, and somewhere in the old hotel, a door slammed hard enough to stop my heart. Poirot's words echoed in my mind. A storm is coming. He had not been wrong. Only what neither of us yet grasped was how close that storm already was, its shadow falling not from the sky, but from within the very heart of Lyme Haven. And when morning came, with that eerie stillness that often follows a violent storm, I found Poirot already awake, dissecting a soft-boiled egg like a surgeon. I confessed to a restless night. He nodded. Yes, but it was not just the wind that disturbed me. It was what may have come with it hidden in its howling. Before I could reply, Inspector Camden entered the dining room, face pale, lips pressed thin. There's been another, he said quietly, leaning in. Vivian Morton, found in her cottage by her gardener, 2 miles from town. Same method, and, he hesitated. Poirot didn't flinch. Another swan. Camden's slow nod was all the answer needed. The morning mist still clung to the hedgerows like whispered secrets when we arrived at Rosemere Hollow, a secluded ivy-clad cottage nestled beneath a canopy of wisteria, that now trembled in a wind that felt far colder than it should have. A constable stood guard, his uniform too crisp, his posture betraying nerves, and beyond him, a cluster of curious villagers gathered like moths to a flame, murmuring fragments of speculation. Inside the garden, cordoned off by thin twine and police markers, the body of Miss Eloise Harrington had been discovered just hours prior, reclined unnaturally on a faded wrought iron bench obscured by blooming hydrangeas. Though the body had already been removed, the impression left behind, a contorted outline, a faint smear of blood, and the unmistakable scent of salt water mixed with something oddly chemical, lingered in the air like a phantom. And there it was again, a single paper crane, folded with meticulous precision, placed with eerie care beside where her hand would have fallen. "So the birds return," murmured Varenne, her voice low and brittle as she crouched to examine the spot, her breath catching. "Strangulation?" I asked quietly, and she nodded, her gaze fixed on the delicate outline of bruising that had darkened the photograph taken earlier. "Same ligature marks, almost identical to the Withers case," she added. The inside of the house offered little comfort, each room pristine, almost unnaturally so, filled with mismatched floral fabrics, sun-bleached photographs, and the scent of lavender and ink. In the study, where the desk faced a grey and endless sea, Varenne paused longest, tracing her gloved fingers along the edge of an open notebook filled with neat lines of handwriting and half-finished thoughts. "She knew something," she whispered, her eyes narrowing at a circled phrase. "I saw him again near the cliffs." The bookshelf nearby bore traces of disturbance, one volume slightly out of place, a faint smudge on the shelf below. There was no sign of forced entry, no signs of struggle apart from a single overturned vase, its flowers wilted, their stems broken. "She either trusted them, or was taken completely by surprise," Varenne murmured. "From the cottage, we traced her final known movements. The grocer remembered her buying pears. The pharmacist said she seemed distracted, asking questions about sedatives. But it was the proprietor of the dusty bookshop at the edge of town, a frail man with watery eyes, who recalled something stranger. She asked for a book on poisons," he said, his hands trembling, but not in that way. "She was scared, kept glancing at the door. Interviews with neighbors painted her as solitary, meticulous, and oddly anxious over the past month. Her gardener, Mr. Talbot, claimed she'd recently asked about installing new locks and spoke of someone from the past returning. Yet no one could name this shadow. And still, that folded paper bird, too exact, too purposeful, haunted the case like a signature left in bloodless ink. This killer," Varenne said at last, as we stood overlooking the bench once more, "they don't just murder, they perform. And until we understand the meaning of this performance, we won't be able to stop them." Her voice carried across the wind, swallowed by the roar of the distant sea, where truth now drifted like driftwood, elusive, waiting to be unearthed. The bell above the apothecary door gave a brittle chime, as we stepped into the cold hush of the street, and for a breathless moment, the air itself seemed to pause, as though even the wind had taken note of what the shopkeeper had let slip in a hushed voice, and with a hesitant glance toward the window. "No outright tailing," he claimed, but a man had lingered nearby, pacing in hesitant arcs, his limp unsettling, more a disjointed sway than an injury, like something broken within him had never healed quite right. His hat, an old trilby, pulled low, had obscured his face, but the shopkeeper spoke of a peculiar unease, the kind that clung to one's skin like damp fog. Pritchard made no comment then, but I caught the flicker in his eye, keen, calculating, and instantly alert, as if some invisible string had just been plucked in his mind. When we returned to the inn, the atmosphere had changed, the warm wood-paneled lobby now holding a charge of urgency. Inspector Carraway stood waiting, sweat darkening the collar of his coat, his expression tight with something between frustration and revelation. Without a word, he gestured for us to follow, leading us to the dim reading room where the scent of old books and tobacco lingered. There, upon the cracked leather of an old ottoman, lay a single page of ivory writing paper, no envelope, no salutation beyond what was scrawled at the top in a delicate but tense script. "Dearest Lillian, I cannot ignore the dreadful reports from Harrowby. Eleanor's death, so eerily like poor Isabel's, leaves me sleepless with dread. I fear there is, and that was all. No full stop, no goodbye. As if whatever came next had been snatched from her hand mid-thought by something unseen and violent. Pritchard took the letter with reverence, his fingertips grazing the edge like it might disintegrate beneath rough handling, eyes narrowing as he read and reread the words, not just absorbing the ink, but measuring the weight of what hadn't been said. 2 women, he muttered, more to himself than to us, 2 towns, 2 unfinished stories, and both ending at the same invisible wall. Carraway informed us that Lillian, the letter's recipient, had been located in Whitcomb Bay, but her home was found empty, her whereabouts unknown, and her neighbors claimed not to have seen her in days. As the inspector departed with a strained promise to keep us informed, we dined in near silence that evening, the cutlery's faint clinks unnaturally loud against the heavy quiet. Pritchard was withdrawn, the drumming of his fingers against his napkin betraying the quickening storm in his mind, always the same rhythm when his thoughts outpaced his words. 1, 2, 3 pause. 1, 2, 3 pause. Then finally he spoke, his voice low and certain. It isn't about the individual deaths, Hastings. It's the choreography, each act performed with care. The same pressure at the throat, the same paper crane placed just so, and that faint medical scent of salt and iodine, as if the killer is cleansing the memory of what they've done. I stared at him, the food forgotten on my plate, unsettled by the calm certainty in his tone. He's not just leaving clues, he's leaving an invitation, a design. That night, unable to sleep, I lay in my bed, the moonlight spilling thin and silver across the carpet, as the waves outside rolled in slow, deliberate rhythms, echoing like the pulse of some hidden mind beneath the water's skin. My thoughts churned, snagged again and again on Pritchard's final words. No pattern is meaningless. If you trace the ink lines far enough, they always spell out something. The wind rattled the window latch gently, and for a moment I could almost see it. Somewhere out there in the cold darkness, someone was folding another crane with surgical precision, preparing their next act beneath the indifferent stars. And always, always by the sea. There's been another, Finch announced grimly, his voice cutting through the morning hush like a blade, and without waiting for reaction, added, Clara Whitlow, sculptor, lived alone in the lighthouse keeper's cottage near the southern bluff. Same method, same signature. A shudder passed through me, but Pritchard remained still, the only betrayal of emotion being the faint tightening of his grip around the teacup he'd barely touched. And the swan? He asked quietly. Finch gave a reluctant nod, left on the mantelpiece this time, wings folded in reverse. Not obvious, but the coroner noticed it differed, more angular, as if in a rush, or perhaps by a different hand. We departed without delay, the coastal fog thickening as we neared the cliffs, where Clara's home stood isolated, wind-beaten, salt-licked and trembling with something unsaid. The scene inside was haunting in its stillness. Stone figures in various states of completion crowded the dim space, their hollow eyes catching fragments of light from the broken window. Her body had been moved, but the outline on the wooden floor remained, chalk and blood mingled like the aftermath of a silent ritual. Discovered by a local boy bringing fish, Finch muttered, poor lad's hysterical. Pritchard, unbothered by the whispers of death, moved slowly through the room, noting every detail with surgical precision, the way the chisel lay just beyond reach, the trail of seaweed near the hearth, the cracked clock frozen at 10:14. Then he paused, frowning at a bookshelf where a small figurine of a crane had been knocked over. Not paper, he murmured, picking it up, ceramic hand-painted. His eyes narrowed. She was warned. We visited Clara's private quarters next, a cramped room at the rear of the cottage, where sketches cluttered the walls, many depicting faceless women standing near the sea. But it was the open drawer that drew Pritchard's full attention. Inside lay a yellowed letter addressed simply to M. The ink had bled from moisture, but fragments were legible. They said we'd be safe, that no one would remember Black Hollow. Pritchard turned sharply to Finch. Have you heard of it? Finch blinked. Black Hollow. That's long gone abandoned school near Dunridge. Landslide buried most of it back in. He paused, thinking. 15 years ago. Pritchard's expression sharpened like a blade catching light. And yet the ghosts walk still. At the inn that evening, a package awaited us. Newsprint and records Pritchard had quietly requested. As he laid them out, the story unfolded in chilling fragments. A girls' boarding school mired in scandal. A drowned headmistress. Whispers of a secret society among the students. Initials recurring across articles like a chant. M. C. E. 4 women, Pritchard murmured, bound by an event they tried to bury. Now someone digs them up, one by one. He tapped a map where 3 red dots now burned, each marking a life extinguished. The dates too formed a pattern, 9 days apart. Exactly. The killer isn't just punishing, he said, eyes hardening. They're counting down. I stared at the final clipping. One word circled in red ink. Reunion. And a single question echoed in my mind, chilling and unrelenting. Who remembers what should have been forgotten? And why now does it return through folded wings and breathless silence by the sea? Just as the brooding quiet of the coastal afternoon draped itself across the hotel suite like a suffocating mist, Arian Delphus stood motionless before the wall he'd transformed into a battlefield of thought, an intricate tapestry of newspaper clippings, torn photographs, coded telegrams, and hand-sketched timelines pinned in maddening asymmetry. He had been at it for hours, moving with the obsessive precision of a man possessed, his fingers occasionally lingering on certain details, as if trying to extract secrets buried in ink and dust. The patterns, Shan, they've begun to whisper, but now they're starting to scream, he said finally, voice low and electric. I looked up from my seat near the rain-flecked window, where the newspaper I pretended to read lay crumpled in my lap, forgotten. I'd been watching him more than reading anyway. This detective, whose mind operated like a locked safe, spinning silently until the tumblers aligned. What are they saying? I asked cautiously. He turned toward me, eyes bright with feverish clarity. 3 women, all strangled with silk cord, all found with a crimson origami phoenix, not a swan as the press insists. It's not serenity he leaves, it's resurrection, fire, ashes, rebirth. He's not erasing the past, Shan. He's trying to raise it from the dead. He tapped a burnt-edged photograph, pinned near the center of the chaos. And the murders, 10 days apart, not 9. We were wrong. The first victim's time of death was misrecorded by nearly 14 hours. That shifts everything. The pattern holds if we correct for those errors. I leaned forward, the storm outside swelling like a heartbeat. So the next victim will be taken today, before the moon reaches its apex. He moved toward a dusty stack of aged documents, and retrieved a set of faded envelopes marked Ravine Institute for Exceptional Girls, Nainital, 2005. Each of the women had ties to this an experimental boarding school hidden deep in the mountains. No online records, just whispers of a fire, a scandal, a headmistress who vanished after one night of unspeakable chaos. The school shut down without explanation. Everything was buried. His voice had dropped to a whisper, as though afraid the walls might hear. All 3 victims were there. Same year. Same dormitory wing. I've got letters, enrollment lists, cross-referenced handwriting samples. The connections are real. But what's the motive? I asked. Revenge. He shook his head. No, something more intimate. This isn't about hate. It's about memory. Someone is reliving that fire, rewriting it. And now the killer's script demands a final scene. At that precise moment, a sharp knock shattered the tension like glass. Inspector Aman Kapoor burst in, breathless and pale. Another attack. She survived. Shalini Roy, local historian, lives alone by the cliffs. Within minutes we were racing through winding coastal roads, the car's tires slicing through sheets of rain as thunder growled overhead. Roy's cottage stood like a lonely sentinel near the cliffs, windows aglow with the feeble resistance of candlelight against the storm. Inside we found her sitting stiffly in a worn armchair, a woolen shawl clutched around her shoulders, a bandage wrapped tight across her bruised throat. Her voice trembled but did not break. I was reviewing old estate files. I heard a noise, footsteps. I thought it was my cat, then hands, rough, strong, around my throat. But I fought like hell. He slipped, hit his head, fled when the hallway light turned on. Arian's face had gone still, like ice just before it cracks. Did he say anything? Yes, she nodded slowly, her fingers twitching. He tried to say my name, but he stammered, badly. It came out like Shesha, before he gave up and ran. A long, terrible silence followed. Arian turned away, staring into the rain-soaked darkness beyond the window, as if something just beyond our reach had suddenly become visible to him. He's not just killing them, he murmured. He knew them, he was one of them. Not a teacher, not an outsider, a student, a boy hidden among girls. A mistake buried by fire and fear. He's killing to tell a truth no one would let him speak. His voice dropped to a chill. This isn't just vengeance, it's a resurrection. And we're already too late to stop the next chapter, unless we can find who survived the fire, and why they were never meant to. And as lightning tore through the sky with a scream and the lights in the cottage flickered, I felt it too, that the storm outside had finally found its reflection within, and this case soaked in secrets and silence was about to explode into something far more dangerous than murder. She instinctively brushed her fingers across the gauze on her temple, a subtle tremor betraying the memory beneath her calm demeanor. I conduct self-defense training at the Women's Civic Center, she said, her voice composed but edged with steel. He didn't expect me to fight back. I twisted free from his grip, struck him hard. He stumbled, shocked, I think. He didn't anticipate resistance. Poirot inclined his head, admiration flickering in his eyes. Remarkable poise, madame. She nodded solemnly, eyes clouded. He spoke, just a few chilling words. You did deserve this. His voice broke with a harsh stammer, then he bolted when I reached for the fire iron. Finch leaned forward sharply. Did you see him? She shook her head, frustration evident. No, he wore a mask, something crude like a stocking over his face. Tall, lanky build, wrapped in a dark heavy coat. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Did he carry a scent, a trace perhaps? She paused considering. Now that you ask. Yes, like seawater, not the fresh kind, but dense briny, as though he'd climbed out of the ocean itself. Poirot's eyes glittered knowingly. After a few more inquiries, we left her to rest, a constable stationed firmly outside her hospital room. We must examine her home, Poirot announced as we exited, his tone suggesting a clock was ticking louder than we realized. Caroline Shepherd's cottage sat quiet and lonely beneath an overcast sky, its garden neatly kept but oddly silent. The front hallway bore unmistakable signs of chaos. A broken vase lay among shattered glass and a table rested on its side, half buried in scattered papers. Finch scoured the garden for prints, while Poirot drifted inward like a shadow, his eyes sweeping the house with surgical precision. He gravitated toward the bookshelf, fingers tracing spines with an intensity that felt nearly intrusive. Why the books? I asked, baffled. He didn't look at me. Because, mon ami, books whisper secrets that photographs dare not. They mirror one's fantasies, their inner life. His hand halted. He plucked a thin volume free, studied it for half a breath, then pocketed it with alarming smoothness. Shouldn't you inform Finch? I asked uneasily. All in time, Hastings, he murmured. First, I test a theory. That night, back in our hotel suite, Poirot arranged a fan of index cards across the desk like tarot. He hovered over them, lost in concentration. The man with the stammer, I pressed. Could he be the same one the shopkeeper described watching Vivian Morton? The limp, the speech, maybe war wounds. Perhaps, Poirot said softly, reshuffling the cards with precise, deliberate hands. The rhythm aligns. 9 days between attacks, and always a woman alone. Then he must be the same man, I said. Poirot nodded slowly. but his eyes were still sifting deeper currents. And yet, what binds these victims? A widow, a retired teacher, a portrait artist, and now Mrs. Shepherd, trained in defense. I frowned. They don't fit together. None, he said gently. Not at first glance, but consider what joins people long after the moment has passed. Shared memories, institutions, a single summer perhaps, or a tragedy buried by time. School, I ventured, recalling the clippings in the newspaper. Poirot didn't answer. Instead, he neatly stacked his notes and gazed toward the darkened window. Tomorrow, Hastings, we telephone some very old places, and then we visit a name that keeps whispering in this case, Black Rock Cove. That night, I lay in bed, mind churning. We had a partial image of our predator, his build, his voice, the rank scent of the sea. But why did he strike? And why these women? In the next room, I heard Poirot moving, the creak of floorboards, the subtle rustle of paper. I knew he wouldn't sleep. He never did, not when the pieces hadn't clicked. Outside, the moon gleamed like a blade across the ocean, casting silver over the cliffs beyond. The cliffs that stood watch over secrets long drowned but not forgotten. And somewhere beneath that endless black tide, I felt it. The truth stirred, restless and waiting. The sun pierced through the morning haze like a silent witness emerging from shadows, casting its pale light over the sleeping town still trembling under the weight of unanswered questions and buried truths. The silence at breakfast was thick, every clink of cutlery sounding too sharp, too precise, until Detective Raylan, with his usual composed gravity, finally broke it. Today, he announced, we journey into the ruins of the past. Two places beckon, the haunted cliffs of Ashgrave Point, and the long-forgotten corridors of Marrow Bay Institute. The name struck a chord, echoing a chill in my spine. Marrow Bay, the very M that had surfaced in a torn, scorched letter found beside the lifeless body of Vivian Hargrove. That fragment, that single clue, had been left behind like a whisper from the dead. Raylan, ever methodical, retrieved a time-worn leather-bound yearbook from his satchel, the same one he had silently taken from the home of Mrs. Renly under the pretense of casual browsing. He flipped it open to a page delicately marked with a thin red ribbon, revealing a faded photograph of 4 young women, their expressions solemn, their eyes unknowingly reaching out from a past that was no longer content to stay buried. His finger hovered over each face. Evelyn Morell, the literature tutor, Eliza Morland, head of mathematics, Cora Harwin, the vibrant yet volatile art mistress, and finally, a young girl, with defiant eyes and an almost haunted beauty, Isla Renly, then Isla Caro, a final year student. Then she knew them. I whispered in disbelief, heart hammering. She lied, indeed, Raylan replied, voice low and deliberate. And a lie, my friend, is often the doorway to a deeper truth. Our journey along the winding cliff road toward Ashgrave Point was wrapped in a tense, eerie stillness. The sea below churned with a fury that seemed both eternal and personal, as if it too mourned something taken. When we reached the viewpoint, the sheer drop revealed a jagged shore of black rock, constantly battered by waves that crashed like the heartbeat of some long-forgotten god. A place of beauty and peril, Raylan murmured, scanning the landscape. Here the young women of Marrow Bay were brought each year for their ceremonial photograph, tradition cloaking trauma perhaps. There was something unsettling about the place, as if its silence was not peaceful but expectant. But we did not linger. We drove on, the road hugging the coastline like a secret trying to stay hidden, until at last we reached it. Marrow Bay Institute. Once a grand institution perched high above the roaring sea, it now stood cloaked in ivy and shadows, its windows like empty eyes watching our approach. Even in its disrepair, the structure commanded respect, an immense 3-story Gothic relic whose bones still held dignity despite the rot. We were met by an elderly caretaker, Hollis, a wiry man with calloused hands and a cautious gaze. Not much left to watch over, he said as he unlocked the heavy iron gates. Closed 12 years now. Owners whisper about turning it into a hotel, but the place won't let go of its ghosts. Inside, the marble entrance hall was veiled in white dust sheets that floated like specters in the still air. Our footsteps echoed with unnatural volume as we crossed beneath a chandelier that had once glittered with promise. But that light had long since faded. What led to its closure? Raylan inquired as we ascended the grand staircase, its once carpeted steps now worn bare. Financial reasons, they said, Hollis replied after a pause. But those of us who've been here long enough know better. It was the Eldon boy, Jamie Eldon. My son worked here then, as groundskeeper. Jamie was just a teenager, helped his father around the estate. One day, a group of senior girls decided to play a prank. Locked him in the old bell tower overnight. Thought it'd be funny, but something went wrong. The boy panicked, tried to climb out, fell 3 stories. Hollis stopped, his voice trembling slightly. He survived but barely. Shattered leg, fractured skull, and something in him broke. Came out of that tower with a limp and a stammer so severe he could barely say his own name. School hushed it up, called it a misstep. But word got out. Parents pulled their daughters, and Marrow Bay never recovered. Raylan's expression didn't change, but I saw something ignite in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or grim certainty. Do you know where Jamie is now? He asked quietly. Hollis nodded. Reclusive sort. Lives alone in a rundown cabin just past Belmarsh Lane. Doesn't speak to anyone. Paints strange things I've heard. Doesn't forget. Doesn't forgive. The atmosphere in the school seemed to grow heavier with every step we took. The dust, the silence, the scent of time, it all conspired to remind us that this place wasn't simply abandoned, it was left. Rooms that once rang with laughter and learning were now hollow, brittle with disuse. In one classroom, a chalkboard still bore half-erased equations, frozen mid-thought. In the art studio, brushes lay dry and cracked beside canvases that had never been finished. And somewhere in these forgotten halls, perhaps beneath a floorboard or behind a rotting doorframe, lingered the seed of everything that had followed. The lies, the pain, the deaths. This was not just an old school, this was the origin point, the wound. And as we stood in that silent ruin, I felt it, something unseen watching, listening. The story wasn't over. No, it was only beginning to bleed. We continued down the deserted hallways of what remained of Winmere Academy, a once proud institution now draped in silence and shadows, its peeling walls and shuttered windows echoing the voices of a past no one dared speak of. Our guide, the aging Mr. Penley, caretaker and reluctant historian, led us through lifeless classrooms and neglected dormitories, each room a crypt for forgotten secrets. Matthews, he muttered when asked. Ah yes, the lad who couldn't walk straight. Speech all tangled, couldn't keep his place, poor soul. His father took him, some say to Portsmouth, others say further, like he was trying to erase him. In what had once been the headmistress's office, now stripped bare but for a lingering sense of dread, Poirot politely requested access to any remaining school records. Most were cleared out when we shut down. Penley shrugged. But there's a cellar where no one's dared go in years. Boxes, papers, mildew. The staircase creaked with age and warning, and Penley refused to follow, citing old knees and older ghosts. We descended into the cold dampness alone, our footsteps swallowed by the oppressive quiet. Cardboard boxes, bloated from moisture, lined the walls in sagging stacks. Poirot and I sifted through decades of detritus, student essays faded by time, memos typed on yellowing paper, and meeting notes scribbled in haste. After nearly an hour, Poirot gave a soft exclamation, his gloved fingers withdrawing a folder marked "Disciplinary." Confidential. Inside was the brittle account of a cruel trick orchestrated by 6 senior boys who had lured Thomas Matthews, a quiet, awkward youth of 17, to the boathouse on a fabricated invitation. The report was cold, bureaucratic, incident, injuries, hospitalization, yet the truth bled through the lines. Names of the perpetrators were inked out, replaced by a scrawled note. Family compensated. Case closed. Expelled for misconduct. TM. I stared, stunned. He was the victim, I whispered. And yet they expelled him. Poirot's voice was grim. They needed a scapegoat. Mon ami. A troubled boy with a stammer and no allies was easier to sacrifice than 6 sons of donors. We found a file on Matthews's father, once a groundskeeper, containing a faded forwarding address in Portsmouth. Poirot copied it precisely into his notebook, and as we emerged into the afternoon light, he paused, gazing out over the crashing sea. "You think the boathouse incident marked the beginning?" I asked. "I think it was the first wound in a life full of them," he murmured. "And wounds, when left untreated, fester." I dared voice the next thought. "So you believe Matthews returned to exact revenge on those girls?" Poirot checked his watch, his face unreadable. "If only time were so simple. We must return to Lime Haven. I have asked Inspector Finch to make inquiries." The drive back was silent, the storm clouds gathering above a mirror to my own growing unease. We arrived to find Finch waiting, the weight of grim news already hanging on his brow. "You're too late," he said flatly. "Thomas Matthews is dead. Suicide. 1 year ago today, jumped from a ferry into the channel, left a note, said the memories were too much." I blinked, unable to reconcile this revelation with the brutal precision of the recent murders. "But, if he's dead, who?" Poirot sat, his usually sharp gaze clouded. "That, mon ami, is the question. If the ghost of Thomas Matthews is not haunting these women, then someone else is. Someone who knows what happened. Someone who remembers." The neat theory we had clung to unraveled at once, scattering like paper in wind. Outside, night fell over Lime Haven with a finality that felt ominous, and as I stared into the darkening streets, I couldn't help but wonder, how many more veils would we need to lift, how many lies cracked open, before we reached the heart of this bloody enigma now known only as the Paper Swan Murders. The morning unfolded with deceptive tranquility as the town stirred slowly to life, bathed in golden sunlight that streamed lazily through the curtains of our modest inn, but within Poirot, as ever, something far more intricate was already stirring, something colder, more calculated. He sat with impeccable posture, his gaze calm, focused entirely on the simple task of dissecting his soft-boiled egg, as though the yolk held answers more profound than any confession, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Have you developed a new theory?" I ventured, unable to keep my curiosity in check, but his answer came softly, detached yet deliberate. "Not new, mon ami, but deeper. The human heart, Hastings. It is never straightforward, this case. It bleeds psychology." Before I could prod further, Inspector Harrow entered, fatigue written all over him like an old scar. His coat hung loosely from his frame, and his eyes carried the haunted look of a man who had reviewed too many files too late into the night. "Thomas Eden had a sister," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Clara. Lives nearby. Works at the Darnley Historical Archives." At this Poirot's eyes lit up faintly, a spark igniting beneath the cool exterior. An archivist. Fitting. In such roles, truth is often pressed between the pages, quietly waiting. We soon found ourselves standing before the weathered facade of the Darnley Archives, a looming Victorian structure with ivy creeping up its stone ribs and windows like wary eyes peering out into the fog. Inside, surrounded by the musty scent of old paper and forgotten history, we met Clara Eden. She was a woman whose features seemed sculpted not by time but by grief, her hair pulled into a practical twist, her expression calm but watchful, and her presence somehow still tinged with something raw, something unhealed. She greeted us in a voice that was eerily serene, yet every word felt like it was being weighed carefully before release. "You're here because of Thomas," she said, not as a question, but as a certainty etched in sorrow. Poirot nodded gently. "We only seek understanding, mademoiselle." And then the dam cracked slowly. "My brother was a gentle boy, stuttered shy, but good. He helped father at the academy. The students, they played a game, locked him in the chapel loft, lit fireworks beneath the windows. They knew he feared loud noises, knew it would send him into panic." Her voice dropped to a whisper thick with memory. The wood was old, rotten. He fell onto the stone terrace below. They called it an accident, her hands previously resting like still water, clenched with sudden force. He lived, barely, but the boy he'd been died that day. And when father was blamed, dismissed for negligence, we were cast out like garbage. A settlement, hush money, and silence. The girls who did it, shielded, influential blood, daughters of judges, benefactors, no justice, just rot. Poirot said nothing, only watched, absorbing every flicker in her eyes like a mathematician solving a riddle with no numbers. We asked a few neutral questions about her work, her routines, but she answered with surgical grace, polite, reserved, calculated. Yet beneath the surface, pain pulsed like an undercurrent threatening to break through. As we left the building, I expected a moment of reflection, but instead Poirot turned sharply to me, all pretense of leisure gone. "Hastings, I require you to visit this address," he said, handing me a slip of paper with almost ceremonial weight. "Speak to her neighbors, casual, discreet, but observe everything. There is something here, hidden in plain sight." I followed his instructions, arriving at a row of grey-bricked flats nestled near the wind-bitten cliffs, the sea murmuring in the background like a forgotten witness. Disguising myself as a potential tenant, I struck up conversation with various residents, most of whom described Clara as a quiet, solitary woman, who kept to herself, rarely seen after dusk. But it was an elderly gentleman, seated in his rose garden and stirring tea with shaking hands, who gave me something unexpected. "She's got clever fingers, that one," he said. "Always folding little papers, flowers, animals, strange things. Said it helps her sleep. Showed me once, a paper crane with blood-red tips. Beautiful and eerie, like it flew straight out of a dream, or a nightmare." Something in my chest tightened. A paper crane. That wasn't hobby, it was signature, a message, an echo from a life that had been quietly unraveling in the shadows. I stood there, heart hammering beneath my coat, realizing we hadn't merely brushed against grief, we had awakened a storm folded neatly into delicate silent shapes. Clara wasn't grieving anymore. She was crafting, planning, and if those paper figures meant anything, she was already steps ahead of us. The morning sun streamed through the curtains like a silent observer, casting long golden fingers across the carpet, but its warmth felt artificial, disconnected from the weight that hung in the air like a storm held barely at bay. I entered the suite with breathless urgency, heart hammering with the thrill of revelation, and found Poirot seated in the eye of a paper tempest. Telegrams, annotated clippings, photographs, and a thick yearbook from Wave Crest Academy fanned open before him, its aging pages whispering secrets. "Poirot," I gasped. "Diana Matthews. She's an expert at origami." It was her and her brother's shared obsession as children, and he in particular, had a gift for crafting swans, delicate, perfect, eerie. Poirot didn't look surprised, merely nodded with a glimmer of vindication in his eyes, as though this final detail completed the shape of a theory long nurtured. "Ah," he said softly, "swans. The very emblem of quiet sorrow and veiled identity. It confirms what I suspected. Hastings, you see, it is always in the smallest of folds that the truth is concealed." I recounted my inquiries. Neighbors described Diana as reclusive but courteous, never scandalous, never loud, a woman of invisible presence, like a figure retreating deeper into shadows, rather than risk the exposure of light. Poirot listened in silence, then gestured to a photo on the table, a faded image from a school play, its cast frozen in time on stage. "She is there," he pointed. "Not center, not cast. No, look closely. An observer. Likely assisting her brother or father, yet her name never once appears in the official accounts of the tragedy at Wave Crest. Curious, none." He moved his finger to another figure, a girl whose face had been violently scratched out with clinical intent, the damage cruelly precise, as though the photo had become a surrogate for someone's hate. "This," he murmured, "is not vandalism, it is a surgical erasure. Whoever did this wanted her gone, not just from the page but from memory itself." I felt a chill then, Not from the room, but from the realization that we were beginning to touch a hidden wound someone had tried desperately to bury. The moment cracked with the sharp knock at the door. Inspector Finch entered, his face tight with unease. "The Grand Atlantic's private dining room is booked for 7, just as you asked, but gathering them all together like this. If the killer's in the room," Poirot raised a hand gently, his voice steady. "It must be done, mon ami. Truth prefers to stand in a crowd, it has nowhere to hide." Then, with a sharper tone, he added, "I have one more request. Station a discreet officer near the town library. Should Miss Matthews leave her post, I must be informed immediately." Finch nodded grimly and departed, and Poirot turned to me with a look of quiet steel. "Tomorrow, we shall peel away the masks, each one. But tonight, rest. You will need your strength." I tried to sleep, but my thoughts spun like leaves in a storm. Something was shifting, the pieces were aligning, yet some corner of the puzzle remained maddeningly incomplete. As I prepared for dinner, I caught my reflection in the mirror, and didn't recognize the weariness in my own eyes. This wasn't just a case, it had become a descent into someone's buried pain, their suppressed rage, folded and refolded like paper, until it took the shape of something sharp. Outside, Limehaven looked deceptively serene under a sky cloaked in dusk, but I knew better. Behind those warm windows and gentle lights lurked a mind capable of turning grief into origami and murder into a message. The next morning arrived with an eerie unseasonal warmth, as if the very air was holding its breath. Poirot razor-focused penned notes in his precise hand while I watched in tense silence. Just before noon Finch returned, not with answers but alarm. "She's gone," he said flatly, eyes hard. "Caroline Shepherd. My officer saw her leave early, claiming she was visiting her sister in Eastbourne. I checked, she never arrived." Poirot's expression didn't flicker. "And her home?" he asked. "Searched top to bottom," Finch said, and pulled from his coat a sealed evidence bag. Inside it, like a silent confession, was a partially folded paper swan, its wings still incomplete, as though abandoned mid-breath. I stared at it, cold fingers wrapping around my spine, and Poirot, after a long pause, turned to the window murmuring, "Some memories are too sharp to forget, and now they return, not to haunt, but to finish what they started." The paper swan lay unfinished in the evidence bag like a breath caught mid-scream, its wings only half folded, a silent cry for help that had never taken flight. Poirot peered at it through the transparent plastic, his eyes narrowing with a surgeon's precision, his voice low and thoughtful. "The folds, mon ami, they are not the same. See here, this curve, this edge, too hasty, too emotional. Whoever made this was not calm. It is not the same hand that folded the others." This, I believe, was her final message, interrupted. My heart jolted. "You think she's been taken?" I asked, the horror beginning to take root. Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the paper as if it might speak. "It is one possibility," he conceded at last, "but not, I think, the most likely. Inspector Finch, I suggest directing your search toward the grounds of the old Mariners' Institute, particularly the abandoned bell tower if it still stands." Finch frowned, uncertain. "The bell tower. That place has been sealed since the fire 15 years ago. Unsafe. The town tried to demolish it, but the cost, its location on the cliffs, it was deemed too dangerous to touch." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then that is precisely where danger would retreat to hide. Begin there." With Finch dispatched, we made our way to the town's historical library, only to be informed that Diana Matthews had called in sick, her first unexplained absence in over 3 years. Poirot's eyebrows lifted only slightly, but in his stillness I saw certainty sharpening. "A pattern completes itself," he murmured. "Now let us see what knowledge she left behind." In the library's hushed-back wing, we were led to the local archives, a narrow glass-fronted room that smelled of dust and forgotten secrets. With the librarian's hesitant approval, Poirot moved like a man following a scent, lifting school records, photographs, and brittle newsprint with meticulous care. "What are we looking for?" I whispered. Poirot did not look up. "Connections, always connections," he said, and paused as he turned the yellowed page of a theater program. "Ah, look, Hastings, It was a decades-old article featuring a production of The Tempest, the cast frozen in time, beneath stage lights long since extinguished. One name leapt out: Caroline Winters, now Shepherd in the role of Miranda, and just behind her, almost ghost-like in the shadows, stood a figure I recognized. A younger Diana Matthews, stage assistant. So they did know each other, I breathed. They shared the same tragedy. Poirot nodded gravely. Perhaps more than tragedy. Perhaps silence. Then, guided by instinct sharpened over a lifetime, he asked to review the staff log for materials Diana had recently accessed. A puzzled junior librarian brought us the records, revealing a chilling pattern. Weeks before each death, Diana had requested articles, clippings, even obituaries, about every victim. This is more than coincidence, I said. She was tracking them, like a hunter. Poirot tapped the page lightly. It suggests intent, yes, but one might still argue, a librarian's curiosity. We require more. Our final stop was her desk, dimly lit in the reference section, untouched that morning. While the librarian kept watch, Poirot knelt and opened the bottom drawer. Beneath dry catalogues lay a worn folder, a private collection of pain. Inside were clippings of each victim's death, arranged with obsessive precision, beside others detailing her brother's suicide. But something was wrong. Poirot held the clippings to the light. You see, he whispered, certain words have been excised, cut with care, phrases missing, titles altered. I leaned closer and saw it now too. Words were missing, verbs, names, key fragments, neatly clipped from otherwise intact pages. To build something else, Poirot said softly, like ransom notes, or threats, constructed not from creation, but from past agony. He replaced the folder exactly as he'd found it, every movement methodical, then returned to the hotel with a new sharpness in his step. There, without pause, he dialed Scotland Yard, and requested to speak with a man I had only heard of in his rare darkest cases, Inspector Merivale. Their conversation was short, their tone grave. As Poirot hung up the receiver, I saw it clearly now. The walls were closing in, not around the killer, but around something more dangerous. A truth so long buried it had taken the shape of something else entirely, something patient, and prepared to strike again, before the final curtain fell. As the amber dusk settled over the quiet seaside town of Elmridge Bay, a storm brewed not in the skies, but within the walls of the Windermere Hotel, where an air of tightly coiled tension gripped the grand hall reserved for what had been ominously described as an evening of answers. Earlier that day, Detective Adrian Voltaire had taken a discreet phone call in the drawing room, his voice so low I could barely make out the fragments, just enough to catch that someone was arriving on the evening train, just in time for what he cryptically called the final curtain. He said little afterward, only that preparations must be made, and that all would be revealed tonight. I dared to ask if he expected Evelyn Hartwell to attend, the enigmatic archivist, whose presence loomed over the investigation like a shadow at midday, and whom we suspected not only of orchestrating the string of poetic murders, but possibly of having orchestrated the disappearance of Beatrice Langford, the retired poet laureate, whose last known act was mailing a paper crane soaked in ink. Voltaire gave a faint smile, and replied, on the contrary, mon ami, if I know her nature, she will crave to see the masterpiece unfold. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense silence. Voltaire secluded himself in his chamber, surfacing only once to make another hushed call. I tried to lose myself in the local gazette, but the world outside the case faded behind the mounting weight of impending revelation. At 6, as I dressed for dinner, I noticed his door ajar. The room was empty. On his pillow lay a single note, scrawled in his unmistakable hand, gone to complete the arrangement. Fear not, the truth waits for nightfall. A chill touched me, and as twilight deepened over Elmridge Bay, I found myself staring out the window, searching the dark promenade for his silhouette. At 7 sharp, I stood among the gathering in the hotel's candle-lit salon, where a long mahogany table bore objects I instantly recognized. Charred poems recovered from crime scenes, a faded anthology from Marlowe Academy, and those damned folded birds, their delicate wings curled in evidence bags. One by one, the invitees arrived: Chief Inspector Mallory, called in from the capital. The somber headmaster of Marlow Academy, a retired literature professor with trembling hands, the editor of a local literary journal, and most shockingly Evelyn Hartwell herself, composed and expressionless, as if merely attending a lecture. The minutes ticked on, murmurs rising like smoke, until at last the doors opened, and in stepped Voltaire, flawless in appearance, and beside him, gasping, was Beatrice Langford, alive, serene, untouched by the whispers of her fate. Silence swept the room. Voltaire raised a hand. "Mesdames, messieurs," he said, voice rich and calm, "the time has come. We stand not merely at the edge of a revelation, but at the center of a literary obsession so twisted, it turned art into murder." As he took his seat, his gaze rested on Evelyn Hartwell, who met his eyes with a strange, unreadable calm. "Each victim," Voltaire began, "died not just by hand, but by verse. Their link was not merely Marlow Academy, but a forgotten manuscript, an abandoned literary society, and one person's hunger to rewrite a tragic past into a poetic finale." The room fell into an uneasy stillness, the sea outside thrashing like a restless conscience, as we prepared to unmask a killer who had composed death like a sonnet. Caroline shifted subtly in her antique armchair, the flame from the nearby candelabra flickering across her face, illuminating the tension tightening her jaw, but it was the stillness in her eyes, too measured, too deliberate, that drew Detective Alaric Moreau's attention like a blade to a pulse. "Your memory, Madam Shepherd," he began, his voice velvet-coated with menace, "appears clouded by time, or perhaps by guilt. Allow me then to restore the details you may prefer buried." He placed a worn leather-bound alumni ledger on the table, the sound sharp and final. 16 years ago, a brilliant yet socially outcast student, Elias Hartley, was found barely alive beneath the shattered remains of the Eastridge Conservatory's old boathouse. The official story said it was a tragic accident, fireworks and recklessness among students, but what the files omit is what I now reveal. It was no accident. It was a deliberate, cruel setup, lured there by those he thought were finally including him, only to be mocked and left amidst the chaos. Among those responsible, Moreau's eyes didn't waver, was Caroline Whittaker, now hiding behind the name Mrs. Shepherd. Alongside her were staff members, Elaine Blackmore, the manipulative headmistress with secrets of her own, Vivian Crowthorne, the art instructor who conveniently lost surveillance footage, and Margaret Vale, whose financial contributions ensured the silence of the school board. A thick silence enveloped the room, and even the ticking grandfather clock seemed to falter. Elias never spoke again. His injuries left him with brain trauma and mutism. His life became a corridor of shadows and whispers, and last spring, after years of suffering and obscurity, he ended his life. Moreau paused, letting the weight of those words settle, before continuing, his voice colder. "And then the murders began, each victim directly linked to that cruel night. Each death announced not with words, but with a delicate origami moth. Elias's childhood obsession, a symbol of fragile beauty corrupted by cruelty." His gaze shifted to a woman in the corner, Amara Hartley, who sat composed, but the agony in her posture was unmistakable. A woman exhausted by mourning, by silence, by justice long denied. Some believed Amara, his only sister, was exacting a silent revenge. Moreau said slowly, "Avenging a brother destroyed not in a moment, but across 16 unbearable years. Yet the evidence doesn't align. The moths are folded with precision, but not his precision, subtle errors only someone mimicking him would make. And then there's you, madame." He took a step toward Caroline, now visibly pale. "You claimed an intruder assaulted you, a struggle, bruises. A moth left as a warning, but the injuries were superficial, strategically placed. The crime scene, too cinematic. A half-finished moth staged like a forgotten prop. And perhaps most damning of all, your vehicle was seen near Margaret Vale's studio, the night she was killed. And let's not forget your financial records, sizable cash withdrawals, matching the nights before each murder." Inspector Rourke leaned forward, voice tight. "Are you saying she faked her own attack, and killed the others?" "Precisely," Moreau replied, his tone turning steel, overcome by guilt, perhaps even jealousy that Elias chose death over forgiving her. She reinvented herself as victim and villain both. She believed if she fabricated an attack, it would divert suspicion, and by invoking Elias's memory through the moths, she'd cloak her revenge as his. Caroline's facade cracked, her lips parting, but no words came, only shallow breaths, and a subtle tremor in her hand. "This is nonsense," she finally spat, but her voice was stripped of conviction. "Is it?" Moreau gestured to Amara. "Would you share what you discovered?" Amara stood slowly, her voice low but resonant. "After the second murder, I recognized the pattern. Both victims had ties to that night. But the origami moths, they weren't his. I recognized them. Caroline used to fold them in class, always a bit clumsier than my brother. I kept one she gave me, long ago, when she still pretended to be kind." She turned, now addressing Caroline directly. "You didn't do this for Elias, you did this to silence your own shame." Caroline's eyes brimmed with tears, not of grief, but fury. "You don't understand," she hissed. "They left me no choice. I was just a child, so were they. And then he came back, in my dreams every night." His silence was louder than any scream. Her voice cracked into a sob. "I just wanted it to stop. And so you made them stop," Moreau said softly, one by one. A symphony of silence, played in blood. The room remained frozen, no one daring to breathe. For the first time in 16 years, the truth stood unmasked, hideous, weeping, undeniable. Outside, the storm howled like some ancient spirit disturbed from slumber, slashing against the window panes, as if demanding entry into the unraveling truth within. Where Poirot stood composed in the center of the parlor, a silent eye in the hurricane of revelations swirling around Caroline Shepherd, whose breathing had turned shallow, ragged. Not from fear but from the slow collapse of a facade she had carefully constructed over a decade and a half. "It was you, wasn't it, madame? The architect of both guilt and vengeance," he said quietly, his voice devoid of mockery, only truth, the kind that sears deeper than accusation. And as Caroline's fingers twitched beside her chair, the atmosphere thickened, brittle with tension, ready to snap. "You created that file, the compilation of evidence timelines, all tied to Thomas Matthews and the 6 who led him toward ruin. When someone broke into your home last week, they didn't find random documents. No. They found a blueprint, your mind mapped out in ink and clipping, a shrine of controlled obsession." He paused, letting the words settle like dust on a forgotten coffin. "She, Madame Shepherd, used your own research against you, fabricated the letters, the threats to veil herself as the target, when in fact she was the executioner." Caroline rose too quickly, almost knocking over the glass sculpture beside her, the pretense cracking with her voice. "This is speculation, fiction. You can't prove I killed anyone." But Poirot remained motionless, lifting a slim weathered book from the table, the kind poets once bled into. "Ah, but we can. This morning when you left your home in such a rush, you took this, a volume of literary quotations. Each crime scene contained this exact edition, strategically placed, certain passages marked. The arrangement of objects, the symbolism, all pointed not to a mad killer, but to someone staging grief as theater, pain as prose." He opened the book to the back, a faint list, names scrawled in looping script. 6 names, 6 former students tied to the incident with Thomas Matthews. 3 have been neatly crossed out, just as their lives were. And here, your fingerprints, not just on the cover, but on every marked page tied to a specific murder. "This," he said softly, "is your diary of vengeance." Caroline's skin had turned ghostly pale, the blood draining from her face faster than from any corpse they had found, and her eyes darted toward the hallway, calculating, predatory. But Inspector Finch had already taken a step forward, sealing her fate with the sharp click of polished boots. "Why?" Diana Matthews whispered from behind, her voice nearly lost in the sound of rain weeping against the glass. "Why do this? He forgave you, Caroline. He forgave everyone. His final note said so." Caroline laughed, a sound brittle, cracked, utterly devoid of joy. "Forgiveness. He escaped, he died with peace. While I lived every second of it. Do you know what it cost me? Expelled, shamed, silenced. My family paid a fortune to hide the scandal, but no money could buy back my future. 15 years. I buried who I was, built a life from ashes, and then I read he took his own life and realized. He got away, and I was still rotting. Her voice wavered on the edge of hysteria, trembling like a tightrope over madness, but as the cuffs closed around her wrists, her defiance gave way to despair. Poirot turned gently toward Diana, who stood stunned, caught in the aftershock of a truth too heavy for one night, and with a slight bow, he spoke with quiet regret. I must apologize for casting even momentary doubt upon you. It was necessary, to draw her from the shadows, to let the mask slip under pressure. Diana nodded slowly, tears glistening though they did not fall. He can rest now, she whispered, knowing the truth didn't die with him. Later, as the wind howled like a dirge beyond the hotel windows and the fire crackled low in the hearth, I finally asked Poirot how he had known. He sipped his syrup de casse slowly, eyes fixed on the dancing shadows. The paper swans, mon ami. Thomas Matthews was a master of the fold, every crease perfect, symmetrical, purposeful. But the ones left at the crime scenes, imperfect, rushed. They bore the eye of an observer, not the hand of an artist. Someone who admired, not someone who created. And then there was the matter of the books, not just present, but revered, staged. This was someone with a literary mind, a person who turned murder into a performance, vengeance into a novel played out in corpses and quotes. He leaned back, the weight of the case settling on his shoulders like dust from an unopened vault. Hate, Hastings, is a strange creature. It twists the soul, folds time inward. Caroline told herself she was a victim, that justice demanded blood. But justice, he said, does not hide behind metaphors and folded paper. That is bitterness, sharpened over time. Outside, the wind keened, and I realized we would leave in the morning, back to London. But the paper swans would stay behind, a ghostly reminder that the past does not die. It folds itself into new shapes, silent and deadly, waiting for the right hands to give it flight.